This is the Native American History presentation, completed by Aidan Hickey and Lucy Loretta for our American Government Final Project. Slides have been commentated over by the group member that has completed the slide.
So the first ever encounter recorded with Native Americans was in 1492 by Christopher Columbus when he landed on the Caribbean island. He originally thought that he reached the East Indies, so he called the Native Americans Indians. He ordered 6 natives to be his servants upon the first day that he arrived.
The 7 Years' War was considered by Winston Churchill as the First World War due to its involvement in the conflict globally. Irrelevant to the Native Americans, many nations in Europe were fighting, but in America, the British were fighting the French, with the French receiving much aid from the Native Americans. The war between France and Britain ended with the Treaty of Paris that awarded the British with lots of land and the removal of troops from America.
So the Treaty of Hopewell of 1785 was signed in Georgia, which was the largest state at the time. It placed native Cherokees under the protection of a young United States and set boundaries for their land. European settlers introduced on Cherokee land, and Cherokees revolted against this treaty. So Treaty of Holston was signed in 1791 to reestablish peace. Cherokees agreed to give up all land outside of their established borders. The Battle of Fallen Timbers was in 1794. It was the last major conflict of the Northwest Territory Indian War between Native Americans and the United States. American troops had a decisive victory against Confederation of Native Americans. Fighting took place on Maumee River, near present-day Toledo. The Treaty of Greenville was signed the next year following the war, which the Indians ceded much of the present-day Ohio, which became America's 17th state in 1803. The Declaration of War, which was signed in 1812. U.S. President James Madison signed the Declaration of War against Britain, which began war between U.S. forces and the British, French, and Native Americans over independence and territory expansion. The Indian Removal Act of 1830 and process of 1836. President Andrew Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act in May of 1830, which gave plots of land west of the Mississippi River to Native American tribes in exchange for land that is taken from them. The Indian removal process took place in 1836. Last of Creek Native Americans left their land for Oklahoma, and 3,500 out of the 15,000 individuals who made the voyage to Oklahoma died on their way. The Indian reservation system was set place in 1851, which is when the Congress passed the Indian Appropriations Act, which created the Indian reservation system. And in this system, the Native Americans were not allowed to leave their reservations without permission.
Colonel John Shivington collected many volunteers to massacre a grouping of Native Americans nearby, resulting in the death of 148 innocent Native Americans, with over half of the deceased being women and children. Immediately following this result, Shivington received praise, but not long after, he received repercussions and was forced to resign from the military.
The Dawes Act of 1887. President Grover Cleveland signed this act in February of 1887, which gave the president authority to divide up all land allotted to Native American reservations to individuals. The Indian Citizenship Act was put in place in 1924. U.S. Congress passed the Indian Citizenship Act in June of 1924, which granted Native Americans born within the territory of the country citizenship. Citizenship was recently limited depending on what percent of Native Americans and ancestry one had, but now the Native Americans who were born within the country would be granted citizenship.
This Supreme Court case asked the question of if the state of Georgia could regulate intercourse inside of a Cherokee nation. The decision on this case was that it was not permitted. The Cherokee Nation was its own nation and in its own territory, had its own laws. This meant that the state of Georgia had zero authority and could not regulate anything. This decision was initially left unrespected and unfollowed even by President Andrew Jackson, until Jackson proclaimed that all decisions made by the Supreme Court had to be respected. This Supreme Court case followed the issue of murder inside of a Native American nation. A Native American man named Crow Dog shot and killed another Native American man in Native American territory. Crow Dog was arrested and was about to serve a death sentence before he argued that the U.S. had no jurisdiction to prosecute Crow Dog. The decision went in Crow Dog's favor and decided that even murder didn't fall under the U.S.'s jurisdiction, until 2 years later when Congress passed the Major Crimes Act of 1885, which gave the U.S. jurisdiction over 7 major crimes, including murder, even on Native American land. Even though we have come a long way in our nation's history, Native Americans are still currently facing lots of different issues. Currently in the U.S., there are 574 tribes that are recognized, but they face so many different issues, such as missing education opportunities, available physical and mental health care, so many issues with their voting rights, and economic issues with poverty and unemployment.